Hello and welcome to Echochamber, my usually less scripted, sometimes scripted series where I talk to myself about anything, and it basically covers anything that doesn't fit in my other series. This is my do whatever series of stuff. Now, today I'm doing something a little bit more experimental, so let me know if you think I did this well, if you'd like to see me do this sort of thing in the future for other games, or just in general where it seems like there would be a good opportunity to do it. And because in particular this time I'm doing a Trails of Cold Steel, just because of the pure depth of the series, it's something I can see very working for it. It won't be with every game, of course, but let me know what you think. I'm just interested. Now again, this is a spoiler talk, but I have not played Trails in the Sky series, so if the point of this is for me to talk to myself, because that's how these videos end up working, and for you to reply with any responses you might think of in the comments, and we'll talk back and forth about stuff. Now, if you want to talk about Trails in the Sky stuff, make sure, for my sake and anyone else's sake who's just played Trails of Cold Steel, you mark it very clearly, and you make sure that any actual discussion that you make is well below a point where you'd have to press read more to actually see it. Just out of the courtesy for everyone else out there, please do that. You are allowed to do it. I'm not going to delete them unless you don't do that, and I will delete those without hesitation. Alright, today I'm going to be covering just some reflections on the actual plot and some of the major topics, especially the revelations near the end of the game, that I've had time to just sit back on. It's been a few weeks since I actually finished the game, so I'm able to just talk to my heart's content about whatever. I've actually been just taking notes when they've come up to me in my phone about stuff I thought would be interesting to talk about. Like the first one, Crow. I think he's a pretty notable thing to talk about. I was a little surprised that I didn't notice. Just thinking back on it, there's so many things that seem to foreshadow him. But it's actually probably not all that surprising that it was difficult to tell. Maybe I'm making excuses at this point. But when I think back on it, there are a lot of moments that really focus on him, especially more than, say, Toa or Angelica or George, especially as a second year. And it didn't really seem that odd for him to come into the class. And looking back on it, he came into the class right after the first time we actually encountered C. I never even thought of that. And like I said during the Let's Play, the stature made me unsure about that. But in general, while they had a lot of focus on Crow, this was a long game. And they had a lot of focus on everyone, to an extent that you could believe that they were them. I guess when the whole thing at the mine happened and they died, or quote-unquote died, what I was thinking was more along the lines of, yeah, I think that's probably just a question for another day, maybe in the sea. I didn't think that they'd actually come back to that by the end, so I wasn't really considering that he'd be dealt with again. I actually thought that they were dead. I thought there might be a situation where they might come back and something like maybe they set up a trap, even though that they were dead, they'd still fulfill their plan or something along those lines. There's a lot of things about it where they focus so much on so many characters, and just because of the misdirection and all this stuff, that in those slower parts of the game, really they put a lot of details in foreshadowing that it's really it's surprising how well they did that in order to cover up that reveal. Because I know I might just be making excuses at this point, but I think they did a very, very good job at that. I will also note I don't think he's being very sincere at the end. You could see his hesitation. I'm reminded by at that the moment before the final dungeon, that moment where he's looking at his Arcus and he's like, wow, mine's actually glowing too. You could just see him there, and you're just thinking like when I went back and I saw that scene, because since I finished it, I edited a lot of these stuff after I finished the game, and I've gone back and I've watched every single episode of mine, whether it's through editing or whether it's after it's uploaded to make sure everything is right. I put everything on 2x speed, but still, I've watched every single episode of everything I've uploaded multiple times. But when you go look back at that scene, you notice something, because he seems like he's regretting it. He knows what's going to happen, he knows what he has to do, and he's just sitting there like, ah, shit. I wanted to deny that I got in really close to them, but God, I can't deny it right now, to himself. It feels like that point. He goes back to denying it later, but it seems like that was the moment where that hesitancy, that true hesitancy that you see in the end with him delaying on actually making some of those statements about none of it mattering. I think he really does care about all his friends. I think it's very highly implied that too. And not to mention all the discussion about what the group has, the connections they have, and his connection into that even. The next thing I wrote down was the Liberation Front's plan. The involvement of Crossbell. I will note, I don't think that Crossbell was actually very involved. Again, apparently the Crossbell stuff happened in another game in parallel to this one that has not come westward for... So only the people who've played the Japanese ones would know anything about this at this point. But I don't think that they are... if I had to guess, I could be wrong. I could maybe playing the game fixes this. Don't tell me. I'd rather wait until they do a Western release. They'll do a Western release eventually, probably, maybe, hopefully. I would say I don't think that they're actually involved. I think something else is probably going on over there, probably from Ouroboros. And I think Ouroboros is probably pulling the strings in multiple areas, and realistically the ILF and the Noble Alliance are probably not as actually in control of their own fates as they probably would want to be. They're getting what they want, obviously, but I think Ouroboros is probably the one who's actually pulling strings on how everything's happening, and is probably going to go the way they want to. And a part of that plan is, like, why did Crow join Class 7? I thought about it, and he was even in the previous year's field studies. What are the chances that C joins a school and he just happens to be selected to be the person that comes in and is like the prototype tester for this whole new curriculum that they wanted to do? I suppose they never really went into much detail and precisely. It was Oliver's idea, wasn't it? It's Oliver's idea, and why was Crow there? That's such an... I'm not really sure. But in terms of why he was in Class 7 himself, why he decided to, like, or why he got to the point of transferring in, I'm not really sure why. I'm willing to bet transferring in was his idea, especially considering it happened the first time, like, the day after all the, well, maybe not the day after, but, like, the next notable event in the game after all the stuff in Heimdall happened with C and Princess Alphen and all that. Well, now, in terms of why he's in Class 7, I'm pretty sure he just wanted to control the situation a bit more. He could also see them as a good way, because, I mean, it would be really good to fight against in training people who happen to be quite competent, but at the same time capable enough to believe that they could do it, but weak enough to actually go against them and control the situation well enough that you could fake your death. I think that would be probably the biggest reason why he'd want to be in Class 7, because he could take their field studies and manipulate the plan around that. And that also makes me think that in terms of their field study locations, in order to make the whole plan work, wouldn't you really have to have someone on the board making those decisions about locations? Like, part of this whole planning process. So maybe it might have been Rufus. He's the one he's the big one from the Noble Alliance on there, right? He'd be the one who would have to be making these choices, right? If there is someone there pushing for that. Now, in terms of the ILF plan, will the nobles actually get what they want? Clearly, they want to just push this noble class system to the point where they don't have to deal with the whole reformist concept going on. I think there's decent chance in the grand scheme of things they'll get what they want, but probably not in the way they want it, or like in the way they expect it. So there might be some pushback from them. Because, like, again, I don't know what all these other plans are. I understand that apparently these were at least partially elaborated on in the Trails of the Sky series, and maybe some of the other ones that weren't released westward. Some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about here that I have no idea about are probably also a matter of actually looking back at some of the, like, reading that they shoved in the library. Apparently there's quite a bit of information in there, but there's a ton of plans, and I'm willing to bet that their little takeover it's not going to go well if the Ouroboros gets what they want. Now, speaking of Ouroboros, what was their actual involvement? Now, again, I don't know that much about them because I haven't played Trails in the Sky. It's an interesting concept, I suppose, because the archaisms, they're a really interesting set of technology that you don't see anywhere else. And they're really similar to the Divine Knights. So it makes me wonder if the Divine Knights were found a long time ago, and Ouroboros has been... I was also told that maybe there was mech stuff in Trails in the Sky too. I don't know what that is, but I'm basing this off the Trails of Cold Steel stuff. But yeah, because archaisms are supposed to be stuff that it's much more advanced than current technology, right? Than the leading edge of what corporations and the industries are able to make. So where's the only place you could really get any of that information, right? You'd have to basically go and figure out some way of reverse engineering these divine knights in order to make them with modern tech. And I'm willing to bet that's what they did. That's where archaisms come from. Probably you could see that progressing line of archaisms in terms of going up to the mechs, the Gundams and whatnot. And I'm willing to bet that was one of their big involvements. And again, I talked about how I think that probably the connection that lets all these different events like play off each other and cause the different things to happen. Like the opening for declaring war so that the ILF could actually shoot the Chancellor. I mean, that's perfect. You'd have to set that, all the stuff with Crossbell, it's like you'd have to set that up in order to get that done. It's such an elaborate plan. You need someone pulling the strings in all of this, and it has to be Ouroboros, because they're the only one who can do this, right? Right? Also, it's like a matter of, are their goals actually in line with the nobles? Now, I don't know what they want. They clearly seem to want something else, considering what's her name, the witch, went well out of her way to actually talk about how that it happened to be in line with what they want, so they decide to help them out there. But clearly what they want is something much grander. What that is, I have no fucking clue. They did not elaborate much on that in the game. They did not. I can only make guesses at this point. Also, just on the topic of Ouroboros, talking about Sharon and Bluebonk. I have at least skimmed over most of the official translation for the drama CD. Now again, it was quite good. It was actually very quite good. But they do reveal in it in the later end. I haven't read it in complete detail yet because I'm in the process of recording stuff for that, which is where I'm getting most of my detailed reading of it from. But near the end, they do note, and I'm pretty sure this is probably revealed maybe in the Sky games too, because I remember hearing that the Bluebonk stuff with the Phantom Thief B was also revealed in that he's actually, both him and Sharon are enforcers for Ouroboros. So their connection and what they want, all the stuff that they're doing, because it makes me think that Bluebonk's role in the game was to be Ouroboros' contact, keeping an eye on probably Crow, because Bluebonk showed up when they first went to Brehard. That was the first time. So because Crow's always been involved in Class 7 to some extent. He hadn't transferred in yet, but it became very clear after the first field study, because he only just like noticed them. I might need to go back and look at that. When they showed up in Celtic, he was there watching them, wasn't he? If I remember correctly, I think he was surprised by them. So maybe Class 7 wasn't part of their plans at that point, and once they foiled or partially foiled some of the stuff that they wanted to do in Celtic, they decided to basically assign him to watch over that whole situation, and then eventually Crow gets transferred in, and he's basically the contact paying attention to everything. I imagine Misty might be as well. She might be following Emma around, as far as I know. I don't know how. She's not an enforcer, as far as I know. I think she's supposed to have a link to Ouroboros. I don't know how they're organized. I don't know their power structure. She sounds like she's pretty influential, though. Speaking of Misty, the witches. God, those still feel out of place. I've been told that apparently they are just casting arts without like any of like the Arcus units or anything like that. But it still feels a little weird. They definitely didn't say anything along those lines. And what they were doing with the magic, or whatever the hell they actually want to call it in universe, it did not seem like the arts we had seen used throughout the game. Because all the arts we had seen had been very clearly just like attack, like elemental. And then you have stuff like show us. I guess that might be Mirage. Mirage is an element, right? Maybe that's why Emma knew so much about the higher element stuff. Maybe that might make a little bit of sense. There is time too. I wonder how far they could go with that. If they're gonna go like more actual world affecting arts rather than just attack stuff. But yeah, it still feels a bit out of place. I'm expecting Cold Steel 2 to give that a lot more context in the world and wrinkle out a lot of the out of place feeling stuff. In terms of their connection to the Divine Knights, I have a feeling about the Divine Knights is that they're clearly not black boxes like George was saying. They're not something that are just like, how does this even work? They have some sort of design to them, which seems completely different than some of the other ancient stuff. So it feels as though, and they feel like they're really tied in, like they're really tied into something in terms of like these legends of the knights. But I mean, really all they are is that they're better constructed. They have really, really, really effective materials. They're like Lammy to some extent, and it feels like they're just an ancient weapon, something could be understood, and like I was saying, could be reverse engineered to the point that you could actually do stuff with. Those still feel a bit out of place too. Again, something that the second game's really gonna have to contextualize to make it work just a bit better. Another thing I noted was, will Crow ever pay the interest back? Will he? I'm gonna. I want to make a prediction on this. No. I think he'll die before that. Honestly, I don't think he'll die. I don't know. He might die. That's sort of just a guess in the dark. But I think before he pays that interest back, I think he'll die first. I think it would be more likely that for them to go narratively like that than for him to pay the interest back. Either are possible, but I'm saying it's more like a 60-40 at this point. I will also note it was very, very interesting to go back to some of the, like, looking at my series, like looking at the popularity of how many people viewed certain videos. Like, some of them are just like, damn, like, really? That one was clearly more popular because of this reveal that happened way down the line at the end here. And I sometimes, because I occasionally go look at how many views and likes I've had on various videos, and just looking at them now, it's like, that makes so much more sense. It's a really interesting thing to look at. After that, I'm gonna look at some stuff for Halo Sheehan, I don't know, Halo Sheehan 1, however you pronounce your username. Thank you for some of these more topics to talk about. The Awakener. The concept of the Awakener. I'm pretty sure this Awakener is simply someone who gets a Divine Knight. I'm pretty sure that's about it, someone who has that physical capability. I talked about it a little bit, but the whole drama CD actually goes a bit into the curiosity that is Reen not knowing his past, no one knowing Reen's past before he was adopted. You have to wonder, you have to really wonder exactly what the role of an Awakener is supposed to be. There's something in his past that caused him to have the compatibility with this mech, and that's why he's able to get the Divine Knight. Now, it's a question of, did he have to have the Ashen Knight? Is that something he had to have in the end? Based on what Celine and Emma were talking about, it sounds like the role of the witches, at least some of them, are to guide the Awakeners to their Divine Knights. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but I think that this might actually be relevant to some of the stuff that they bring up in the Cold Steel 2 trailer. Theories on all characters and their roles in CS2. Ooh. I think Reen, the chances of him joining either faction is stupid. Elisa also seems like she'd be the type to not join either faction. Elliot, you know, I have watched the opening for Cold Steel 2. I have. I got ahead. I think it was like the day I finished the game, I went and watched that and the trailer for the first time. I haven't tried to analyze the opening too much because I know those can have a bit of spoilers in them. But I do remember him and Machias being in the same room, like they were put together. I'm thinking that he might actually join the Reformist faction. If he does, even to like a short time, him and Machias, I think, are perfectly possible for that. I also remember Laura and Emma being together. Both of them strike me as people who, personality-wise and what they know wise in their connections to people, would put them in a situation where they probably would not want to join either faction either. I think Crow probably joined the Noble faction. I think there's a decent chance of that. Gaius, I think he's more likely to go home. I think he is. I think he's more likely, if a civil war breaks out, he'll go home so that he can help protect his home instead of joining a faction or anything like that, even if there's a third faction. I think he might be roped into it. I think he'll probably be roped into it, just knowing how the stories tend to go. Fee, she might actually, she might join the Noble faction just because of the whole, from her Old Jaeger group actually being in it. And, you know, in the same time, her big thing is having a family, and she considers them family, and she considers her the Class 7 family too. So she definitely wouldn't join a side for anything other than them being family and having something that she actually wants to fight for, I suppose. Which seems most likely to be family, but who else am I forgetting? Eustace. Maybe this is a bit obvious, but if he's going to join anyone, he's going to join the nobles. He obviously seems very hesitant on just embracing the whole concept of the nobles not acting in nobility. So I think the thing is that I can see the possibilities for for some of them to actually go and pick a side, but I can very easily see the possibility for all of them to just be like, nope, let's do our own thing. All of them seem like they could do that. So I think that there's a good chance that a number of them are going to pick a side for a while until things really get going. And I mean, Reen flew away, so I'm going to assume that they're all broken up at a point, because I'm assuming that the school isn't running normally anymore. They sort of hinted at it quite a bit in the first game, where they're talking about, oh, I fear for what will happen to this school in the future, and I'm willing to bet Thor's is not operating during Cold Steel 2. Or if it is, it's like under some sort of like regime by the noble faction, where they're just like, nobles are number one, commoners are not allowed anymore, or they change the classes for commoners to be like, you must serve the nobles, and you must be super good at that, and whatnot, and so forth. And everyone has to join the provincial armies or something like that. And that's a complete possibility. So, Sarah, all the adults, I'm pretty sure all got their shit together well enough that they're not going to hesitate, and they know exactly what they want. Next, the Noble Alliance. Which side is Rufus? Theories about Duke Cayenne, the leader of the Great Houses, and why so few appearances in Cold Steel 1. Connections between Ouroboros and the Noble Alliance, and the Imperial Liberation Front 2. And where are the joining points and benefits of each faction? I was talking about that a little bit before, Ouroboros and the Noble Alliance and the Imperial Liberation Front. I think those are all very different groups, very different interest. It makes me, I don't know that much about Ouroboros. I think Ouroboros is the person providing support. I think they're mainly providing concepts and ideas and plans for the Noble Alliance, and the Noble Alliance basically contracts out to the Imperial Liberation Front and says, hey, go do this because we can't be seen doing this ourselves. And it makes me wonder, is the Imperial Liberation Front, are they even going to be a thing in Cold Steel 2? Because it feels like their whole thing of getting rid of Osborne is done, don't you think? It makes me wonder, if Crow's going to be on the Noble Alliance's side in Cold Steel 2, why? What does he want at this point? Osborne is gone. Does he really hate everyone else on the Reformist side so much that he wants to get rid of the rest of them for his revenge? Because that's what it seemed like. It seemed like his point was revenge and to stop the sort of thing that that happened to Jirai, I think it was, ever happening again. Yeah, to summarize, Ouroboros, I think, is the underlying support. Noble Alliance is the actual one trying to implement the plan, and the Imperial Liberation Front is more like a contractor. And I'm thinking that they all have different goals, and I'm thinking that when it comes down to actually achieving the end goals, there's going to be quite a bit of infighting there. I will do Cayenne. Leader of the Great Houses and why so few appearances in Cold Steel 1. Well, Duke Cayenne seems like a very interesting person. We saw him with the Jaeger guys, right? So he's very clearly the one, at least one of the people, who has a very, very large hand in orchestrating all of this. Now, why he has so few appearances? Wouldn't you want to keep a low profile for this? You don't have any connections to the stuff that's going on in Class 7, and you already have Crow, and presumably he knows about Blue Bonk, I'd imagine monitoring them to some extent, not to mention anyone else from the noble factions in there that could give you status reports. So it seems more like if he was trying to orchestrate this all from behind the scenes, why he has so few appearances is probably that he's probably the top leader of it, and he probably wants to keep a really low profile and not actually draw attention to himself. He wants to draw attention to the other things. Now, in terms of what he actually do in Cold Steel 2, I don't know. We haven't seen him that much. I don't know his personality that well, or whether his motivations and all that, if it is anything more than being the leader of the Noble Alliance. I can't say much more than that. Now, in terms of Rufus, it's a good question. He seems like a very reasonable man. He seems like the type of person who might not go along with it entirely. In fact, like I was saying, he would have to be the only one on the board for Thor's to actually orchestrate the field study locations in a way that the ILF plan can go off without a hitch like they actually ended up doing. So he has to be working with them, other than the fact that he was there to pick up 2 Cayenne. Other than that, it seems very clear that he is the one at Thor's who actually, now that I think about it, he probably was the one who was the connection to Thor's and gave reports, other than Crow and Blue Bonk. So I'd imagine he's probably on the noble side. But again, he seems like the type of person who's smart and he's understanding. He's not the type of person who would want to go full extremist on that side. So if I had to make a prediction for what his role in that whole conflict is, I think he might be trying to be the person to keep a level head on the Noble Alliance. Because I could very easily imagine some of these noble leaders letting it get to their head and going full out tyranny mode. And Rufus might just be there thinking, yes, I prefer my side to win, but I don't want to see us go full ISIS or some of that shit. Okay, next is Osborne. You say you can't believe he's dead. Well, apparently there was quite a bit with Osborne in the previous games, I've been told. I don't know what. Apparently he was involved in some of the stuff that went down then. So apparently they built him up quite a bit. It is surprising that he went down so easily. So it definitely feels as though there's more to his death than meets the eye. Now, whether he's actually dead, and it's not like a double or something, I'm going to say it's probably not a double. I really don't think so. Because if it was a double, his voice seems pretty hard to replicate, for one. So if you were doing that, then you'd have to assume that the guy was lip syncing. And there was a point at the end there where you very clearly heard him said, "Well played, Crow," basically. And he wasn't making that as an announcement to everyone. He wasn't making that as part of his speech. That was his voice saying that. So I think that was probably him. Now, does that mean that I think he was outplayed? Maybe not. Maybe he died on purpose in order to fulfill his own plan. See, I don't know that much about Osborne. So as far as I know, he could be the type of person. He might be ruthless, he might be willing to let people die for his goals, but who knows, maybe he's let himself die for his goals. Maybe he is that sort of person. He's ruthless, he has very good intentions for everyone, but he's sort of the person, the end justifies the mean, and maybe he's just sort of the person who ends up letting himself die in order to set up his own plan for the Reformist faction. In terms of whether he's dead or not, just narratively, I actually think it would be more interesting to see him stay dead. Because either he has these, really interesting plans set up and things go exactly how he calculated it to, or you see a situation where you have a vacuum of power on that side, and it would be really interesting politically to see how that plays out in the middle of a civil war. Because on the other side, you have 3 factions, the Ouroboros, the Noble Alliance, and the ILF, trying to grab their influence, trying to grab what they want from this whole conflict. So that's sort of a vacuum of power too, at the same time as you don't have one leader. Because that was the big thing about Osborne for the Reformist faction. He was that one figure who drove everything. That's really that's the role he seemed to play in that faction. He seemed to be the person who basically stood as the center stone to that. So with him dead, it would be interesting to see that vacuum of power on both sides and to see how crazy that is. And with that vacuum of power on both sides, wouldn't that open up the opportunity for a third faction to rise up and actually settle the conflict just a bit more? I'm just saying. I'm thinking that would be a very interesting way to go about it. As for his weird connection with Reen, I guess the big thing was their eyes meeting. That was probably the big one. I don't know. My best guess is that he just knew. He knew better. He knew about all this stuff. And it's not so much a connection with Reen as much as he knew what would happen to Reen in the future. He's planned things out in such specifics that he could see how, like the ultimate master plan sort of thing going on. He seems like just how he's characterized and all of it, he seems like the sort of type that would know that and would be able to see that coming, especially since he did send Milliam to keep an eye on the old schoolhouse. Lastly, I'm going to break down the E3 trailer that was released. So let's stop this and look at various stuff.
As my consciousness began to fade, I heard a distinct voice resound at the back of my mind. A voice with all the gravity of steel, yet a strange sense of familiarity, of warmth.
the Ashen Knight!
Okay, you have a lot of extra setup for this one, just like setting up the whole concept that Reen is somehow connected. Like they said in the drama CD stuff, they don't know what his past is. I'm getting the feeling that Reen is like part of the select group. I don't know, maybe he's reincarnated. I don't know, maybe he was experimented on by Ouroboros as a child. Maybe him and Crow both were, and they're both abandoned at a point in order to seek out their destinies and to be part of their plan. Who knows, maybe Reen winning in the end is part of Ouroboros' plan. But again, this familiarity he seems to have with the Ashen Knight implies that he has some sort of history with it, whether that's spiritual, whether that's actual history of physically interacting with it somehow. He definitely seems like he has some sort of history with it.
With the whole of the Empire caught in the throes of civil war, what exactly do all of you intend to do from here on out?
The Azure Knight is already on our side. But if we had your Ashen as well...
Now, I was sort of talking about this a little bit before, but it seems really weird that Crow would be on their side. I mean, think about it. What does Crow have to earn at this point? I mean, it seemed, at least in the first game, that his whole point was to get revenge on Osborne and stop that. What point does he have to work for the Noble Alliance at that point? You also have the whole thing about how they're clearly trying to tempt Reen to the dark side. So it is interesting. I feel as though the second game's going to have a lot to do with visiting the various factions and trying to organize some sort of resistance. Like I was saying before, it would be really interesting to see like the power vacuum on both sides. I actually do think that would make for a really interesting plot. Basically, Reen using that opportunity to gather and create a third faction around his Ashen Knight to actually take advantage of the big power vacuums on both sides.
You boys have so much potential. But potential is only that. Potential.
What we've got mixed into us is obviously different in strength and nature.
Now, these guys are totally and completely new. The guy with the glasses actually sort of reminds me, he's like white hair. He reminds me of Reen, so maybe he's an Awakener too. I wonder if Crow can do that. He already sort of has white hair. Maybe Crow's in a constant form of having the white hair like that. But it seemed like they'll actually address the nature of his power in the second game quite a bit more. I'm thinking that guy probably will be. I actually sort of think that those two, if they're from any side, it'd probably be either from Crossbell, I don't know why, or more likely from Ouroboros. They're probably Ouroboros agents. I remember seeing them in the opening when I watched that.
With the way you are now, I don't even need to try. I'll always win.
And as I listened, I could feel myself being beckoned towards the Wheel of Fortune.
This is not a long trailer, it's only about a minute or so. But this is the line that makes my mind just go wild with theories. Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune usually refers to fate. If you look at it from a sort of arcana point of view, because I know that Japanese narratives tend to like to draw from arcanas. Wheel of Fortune, if you've ever played the Persona series, then you know that there's a Fortune Arcana, and that's actually a shortening of the Wheel of Fortune Arcana. If you look at what the Wheel of Fortune actually means, typically it does actually have to do with fate. It has to do with being the one to actually change destiny, to change how things actually work. Now, thinking of it that way, it makes me think that's probably the point of what an Awakener is. I'm trying to think of this in a way that adds in the whole mystical, spiritual sort of the witches and the divine knights and all that stuff, the much less grounded aspects of this world. And the big thing that comes to mind is that somehow there is a legend, there is predictions that apparently are true enough for people to believe in, that they're presumably Ouroboros to believe in, that there are people, these Awakeners, who will get the Divine Knights and be the ones to decide how the world moves forward. And if I had to guess at what Ouroboros' plan was, it would probably be to use these Awakeners in order to actually move forward, like create a world that they want. If you wanted to go the typical, almost stereotypical evil organization, Illuminati style plan, I'd say that they'd probably be aiming for some sort of utopia. It seems like the most likely thing in that regard. But who knows, maybe they want to bring back the Dark Age stuff. Maybe they want to do something else. But overall, I'm thinking Trails of Cold Steel 2 will probably be about two things. it'll probably be about Reen actually going around, getting his friends back together, visiting both factions, getting more info on himself, on all this stuff and how it works and how it actually is supposed to work, and seeing the opportunity with power, like a vacuum of power on both sides, to actually bring the conflict to an end and rallying people. Because there is that, I am reminded that one part from the opening, the one thing that really sticks in my mind, because I don't remember a ton from it, thankfully, because I haven't watched it too much, of him like raising his arm up and like a bunch of people in Thor's military uniforms also being that, like, around the nonsense. Fine. The Courageous, I think. I don't remember its actual name. Was it the Courageous? No, it's the Nonsense. But yeah, I'm thinking it's probably about him going around and organizing a third faction, basically. And it probably is also about Ouroboros trying to manipulate the Divine Knight users into doing what they want to create a future that they want. I had to guess at what the plot of Trails of Cold Steel 2 would be about. I'm thinking it's probably that. I know there's a third game. I don't know if the second game leaves off in a cliffhanger, or if the third game is, or if there is like a finale, like an actual end to the current plot in the second game. So who knows about that. Third game's still in development. I know it's coming out in Japan sometime next year, I believe. And hopefully it'll come westward soon after that. Who knows when? And this is probably the last thing outside of the drama CD stuff, which I'm not really going to have many comments on unless you want to ask me questions in the comments there. Feel free to comment, respond to some of my ideas down there. I'd love to talk about it with all of you. It's really fun to talk to you guys in the comments. And I'll see you all. Trails of Cold Steel 2. Drive safely.